The true generals of ancient battlefields were not men but elephants. Their painted tusks and earth-shaking charge could shatter entire armies. This video uncovers the incredible hidden stories of how animals, from war elephants to messenger pigeons, steered the course of history and decided the fates of empires. You will gain a completely new perspective on the rise and fall of civilizations, one that moves beyond kings and treaties to the paws, hooves, and wings that truly shaped our world. How did a single bird's flight prevent a military catastrophe? What role did a sacred bull play in the political stability of an entire kingdom? We will journey through ancient conflicts and secret missions where the actions of creatures great and small altered the political landscape forever. This exploration reveals a profound and overlooked relationship between humanity and the animal kingdom. It challenges everything you thought you knew about power and control. What animal do you believe has had the most surprising impact on our world? That thunderous charge on the plains of India was just the beginning. The concept of the war elephant, this living fortress, began a slow march westward, its power igniting the ambitions of empires far from its jungle home. After Alexander's generals witnessed their terrifying potential, they brought these magnificent beasts back to the Mediterranean, where they were eagerly adopted by the successors to his empire. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies built entire corps of war elephants, seeing them as the ultimate symbol of military might and imperial prestige. Imagine the sheer spectacle for a Roman legionary who had never seen such a creature, facing a line of towering animals draped in armor, their tusks fitted with deadly iron points. The psychological shock was a weapon in itself, but the story of the war elephant is also a story of adaptation and, ultimately, limitation. These animals, so formidable on the open plains of the East, struggled in the different terrain of Europe. They were vulnerable on rough, uneven ground and famously spooked by clever tactics, like pigs set on fire and driven towards their lines. The legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal learned this the hard way on his epic crossing of the Alps, losing most of his elephants to the brutal cold and the unfamiliar landscape before he could even bring them to bear against Rome. So while the war elephant was a fearsome tool of empire, its reign was defined by a specific set of conditions. Its power was immense but also fragile. This reliance on a single, powerful animal species raises a profound question. What happens when an empire's fate is tied not to a giant, but to something much, much smaller? While the elephant was a terrifying spectacle, true imperial power often moved on four much swifter hooves. The cavalry horse was the undisputed engine of conquest, a creature that redefined the very meaning of speed and scale in warfare. Nowhere was this more evident than with the Mongol Empire. Under Genghis Khan, the horse was not merely a component of the army, it was the foundation of a revolutionary military doctrine. Each warrior maintained a string of small, incredibly tough ponies, switching between them to cover staggering distances. This system allowed the Mongol hordes to travel up to 100 miles in a single day, a rate of movement that would not be surpassed until the invention of the internal combustion engine. They could appear as if from nowhere, unleash a storm of arrows from horseback, and vanish before a heavier, slower enemy could even form ranks. It was a strategy of shock, awe, and relentless pressure, all powered by the horse. But the impact of the horse went far beyond the chaos of the charge. As expert equestrian Dr. Deborah Bennett explains, the domestication of the horse did not just change travel, it redefined the very scale and speed of empire building and administration. These animals became the vital arteries of communication that held vast territories together. The Persian Royal Road, an ancient marvel of logistics, relied on mounted couriers to carry decrees across thousands of miles. The Romans later perfected this concept with their own imperial postal service, the cursus publicus, a network of way stations where riders on fresh horses could relay messages at incredible speeds. The fate of entire provinces often rested in the leather saddlebags of these lone messengers. Even in the modern era, the American Pony Express, though short-lived, demonstrated the same enduring principle, using teams of riders and horses to create a fragile, high-speed link across a continent. This absolute dependence on equine speed, however, created a profound vulnerability. The strength of an empire could hinge on the stamina of a single animal. What if a messenger's horse had stumbled, delaying a crucial order to reinforce a besieged fortress? What if a king's prized warhorse fell ill before a decisive battle? The entire intricate machine of state could falter because of one misplaced hoof. This reliance on a ground-based, four-legged messenger was a logistical chain with countless potential points of failure. But empires would soon discover a solution that took to the skies, a feathered courier that could fly over every obstacle on the ground. The vulnerability of a single horse was a risk no commander wanted to take, but a solution was already soaring high above the battlefields. In the desperate winter of 1870, during the siege of Paris, the city was completely cut off. The only threads connecting the besieged populace to the outside world were fragile balloons and, more reliably, homing pigeons. These birds became winged telegraphs, carrying tiny microfilmed messages across enemy lines, each one a vital lifeline of information and hope. Their incredible homing instinct, an ability scientists believe relies on sensing the Earth's magnetic fields and memorizing visual landmarks, made them a communication system that was both ancient and extraordinarily effective. This was not a new technology. Decades earlier, Julius Reuter, the founder of the Reuters news agency, used a fleet of pigeons to carry stock prices between Aachen and Brussels, consistently outpacing every ground-based competitor. But it was in the chaos of war that their value became truly priceless. During World War I, a pigeon named Cher was released by the encircled and besieged Lost Battalion of the American 77th Division. German soldiers saw her rise and opened fire. She was shot through the breast, blinded in one eye, and had one leg nearly severed. Yet she flew on, covering 25 miles in just 25 minutes, delivering the message that saved 194 men. She was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for her valor. As military historian Andrew Roberts notes, in an age before reliable radio, the speed and fidelity of a pigeon could mean the difference between a coordinated assault and a disastrous, isolated defeat. Could the frantic flight of a single bird have truly averted a massacre or secured a pivotal victory? The story of the messenger pigeon proves that in the service of empires, physical size was no measure of impact. These feathered couriers carried the fate of armies on their light wings, yet other animals were assigned a far more direct and brutal role in the theater of war. While pigeons navigated the skies, a more ancient and intimate partnership was unfolding on the ground. A Roman legionary on a distant frontier might find his greatest comfort not in his commander's speeches, but in the warm, breathing presence of the Molossian hound standing guard with him. In the dead of night, these formidable dogs patrolled the walls of forts and encampments, their hearing and sense of smell creating an invisible perimeter no human sentry could match. Their fierce loyalty made them the perfect early warning system, but their roles quickly expanded into something far more aggressive. the Romans equipped their war dogs with spiked collars and armor, training them to surge forward and shatter enemy lines or mercilessly hunt down fleeing troops. This tradition of the canine warrior stretched across continents and centuries. Attila the Hun understood this power, employing massive mastiffs to add a terrifying new dimension to his cavalry charges. This was a partnership forged in the crucible of survival, a bond that turned a domesticated animal into a living weapon. The core of this effectiveness lies in biology. A modern military canine handler would later explain that a dog's sense of smell is up to 100,000 times more acute than our own. This incredible ability allows them to detect hidden explosives, locate wounded soldiers buried under rubble, and track enemies through dense terrain in ways that sophisticated technology still struggles to replicate. But this utility sometimes led to desperate and tragic measures. During World War II, the Soviet Union, facing a dire shortage of anti-tank weapons, trained what became known as anti-tank dogs. The idea was for the dogs, with explosives strapped to their backs, to run beneath German panzers, where the magnetic trigger would detonate. The program was fraught with difficulty and heartbreak, a stark reminder of the extreme lengths to which empires and armies will go. In stark contrast, the modern role of the military working dog is one of precision and irreplaceable partnership. A Belgian Malinois named Cairo was a vital member of the Navy SEAL team that raided Osama bin Laden's compound, using his specialized training to sweep for explosives and guard the perimeter. In such high-stakes operations, the loyalty forged between a handler and their dog can be the single factor that determines the success of a mission and the survival of an entire team. This canine versatility made the dog a multi-purpose tool in the Imperial toolkit, valued for its senses, its strength, and its unwavering loyalty. But not all animal agents were trained for their roles. Some were unwitting participants in a far more sinister form of warfare. That bond of loyalty between soldier and dog stands in stark contrast to the most infamous animal agent of all, one that served no master and followed no commands. In the 14th century, the bustling trade routes of the Mongol Empire, the famed Silk Road, did not just carry silk and spices. Hidden in the grain sacks and cloth bales, stowed away in the dark holds of merchant ships, were black rats, and on those rats, fleas carrying the bacterium Yersinia pestis. This was the Black Death, a pandemic that would become one of the deadliest in human history. It did not simply kill people, it dismantled societies. From Asia to Europe, the disease decimated populations, irrevocably weakening established powers like the Byzantine Empire and contributing to the collapse of the feudal system in Europe. The bacterium found a perfect vector in the black rat and its fleas, which thrived in the crowded, unsanitary conditions of medieval cities. As the historian Barbara Tuchman noted, the plague was the equivalent of a nuclear bomb. It reset the social and economic order of Europe. Manpower vanished, fields lay fallow, and trade networks that were the lifeblood of empires shattered. The very illusion of stability that rulers relied upon evaporated, leading to widespread peasant revolts and a profound crisis of authority. In a chilling foreshadowing of biological warfare, the siege of Kaffa in 1347 saw the Mongol army allegedly catapulting plague-infected corpses over the city walls. This act weaponized the disease, using the animal vector as a delivery system for chaos. How many conquests were halted not by armies, but by a microscopic pathogen hitching a ride on a common rodent? This invisible, animal-born threat demonstrated with brutal finality that the smallest creatures could bring the mightiest empires to their knees. While rats brought disease through sheer accident, other animals were deployed as deliberate and calculated instruments of terror. The silent, creeping terror of the plague stands in stark opposition to another desert dweller, one whose power was harnessed with deliberate and brilliant strategy. Across the vast, sun-scorched deserts of Arabia, the true key to mobility and military dominance was not the horse but the camel. Where a traditional army would simply perish from thirst or starvation, a camel corps could not only survive but thrive, extending the logistical reach of an empire deep into its most hostile frontiers. The camel's legendary ability to travel for days, even weeks, without water while carrying immense loads, transformed it into the ultimate vessel for desert warfare. This was not merely about transportation, it was about projection. Empires like the Assyrians and later the Islamic caliphates built their desert power upon the backs of these resilient animals, projecting force across terrain that had once been considered impassable. The Persian Emperor Cyrus the Great was a pioneer in this field, credited with creating some of the first dedicated camel cavalry units. His genius lay not just in their utility, but in their psychological impact. At the Battle of Thymbra in 547 BC, Cyrus positioned his camels at the front of his lines. The unfamiliar, pungent scent of the animals caused the enemy Lydian horses to panic and bolt in confusion, breaking their cavalry charge before it even began and securing a decisive victory for Cyrus. As ancient logistics specialist Dr. Henry Smith observes, a camel corps could operate where a traditional army would starve or die of thirst. It extended the logistical reach of an empire into its most hostile frontiers. This utility was recognized far beyond Persia. The Roman army integrated camels into their supply trains to support legions stationed in arid provinces, while the British Empire later relied heavily on camel-mounted troops in their colonial campaigns across Africa and the Middle East. Just imagine for a moment what if a desert empire had lacked access to these resilient ships of the desert. Their very existence, let alone their expansion, would have been nearly impossible. The camel's unique biological adaptations allowed for the creation and maintenance of power structures in some of the world's most punishing environments. This mastery over desert logistics was a form of imperial control, as decisive as command of the seas. And just as empires learned to rule the deserts, they also sought to command the very oceans, often with the help of another, far more surprising animal. Aboard a treasure-laden Spanish galleon, the most important guardian might have been the smallest, a ship's cat silently patrolling the dark hold. For the superstitious sailors, this feline was a living charm, a creature believed to foretell the weather with its behavior. To lose a cat overboard was an omen of certain doom, while its gentle purr was thought to have the power to soothe a raging sea, yet its true power was far more tangible. In the confined wooden world of a ship, rats were a clear and present danger. They would gnaw through precious food sacks, spoil barrels of fresh water, and most dangerously chew through vital ropes and rigging. A single compromised line could lead to a sail collapsing in a storm, dooming the entire vessel and its mission. The cat was the first and most effective line of defense against this creeping threat. The famous explorer Captain James Cook understood this practical necessity perfectly, always ensuring a cat was aboard his ships as he charted the vast and unknown Pacific. Its relentless hunting protected the provisions and the structural integrity of the ship itself, making it a tiny, indispensable cog in the vast machine of naval empire. How many expeditions succeeded? How many maps were drawn because a feline hunter kept the rats from chewing through the very threads that held the ship together? This humble animal ensured that the lifelines of maritime power remained unbroken. On land, however, the use of animals took a far more calculated turn toward the psychological. Even the heavy plate of a Byzantine cataphract offered no protection from the tiny, furious invaders that could find their way into every joint and seam. The fortress of Jotapata provided a legendary example of this tactic in the year 69. where Jewish defenders facing the might of Rome did not rely on boiling oil alone. They are said to have hurled sealed beehives directly into the advancing Roman ranks. The clay pots shattered, releasing a storm of confused and enraged bees upon the legionaries, whose disciplined formations dissolved into a swatting, chaotic, and painful retreat. This was not an isolated incident of desperation, but a documented form of biowarfare. As the entomologist and historian Dr. Eva Crane noted, swarms of bees were considered so effective that their hives were listed as standard military equipment in some medieval armories. Commanders were not just using animals, they were weaponizing an entire ecosystem, turning an insect's natural instinct to defend its home into a tool for breaking enemy morale. The psychological terror was as potent as the physical pain. Imagine the sheer, unnerving chaos of being caught in such an attack, your armor suddenly a trap filled with stinging insects. This brutal ingenuity spanned centuries. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong masterfully employed the same principle, rigging booby traps to dislodge hornets' nests onto unsuspecting patrols. The result was always the same, a sudden, disorienting, and painful assault that could halt a military advance in its tracks. Could a single, well-aimed beehive have been enough to disrupt a crucial siege engine assault or shatter the formation of a charging army? The historical accounts strongly suggest yes. This creative, terrifying use of nature's smallest warriors reveals a stark truth. In the theater of war, raw power was often less important than ruthless ingenuity. And that same inventive spirit was applied to the very largest creatures when empires took their conflicts to the sea. Beneath the waves, a different kind of intelligence operation has been underway for decades. In the cold, dark waters of a modern naval base, a highly trained bottlenose dolphin glides silently, its sophisticated biological sonar pinging through the murk. It locates a mine attached to the hull of an aircraft carrier, a task that eludes even the most advanced machinery. This is not science fiction. It is the reality of the United States Navy's Marine Mammal Program, an initiative that since the 1960s has harnessed the natural abilities of dolphins and sea lions for national security. A retired Navy trainer explains that a dolphin's sonar can distinguish between a rock and a mine on the seafloor with an accuracy we still cannot replicate with technology. This incredible biological sonar, known as echolocation, allows them to create a detailed sound picture of their environment, identifying objects buried in sediment or hidden in zero visibility conditions. These animals have been deployed in real-world conflicts from the Vietnam War to the Gulf Wars, tasked with protecting strategic harbors and locating underwater threats. Meanwhile, California sea lions, with their exceptional low-light vision and agile, dexterous flippers, are trained for a different role. They can dive hundreds of feet to attach recovery lines to expensive test equipment or even classified objects lost on the ocean floor. What secrets or weapons have been retrieved from the abyss thanks to the keen senses of a marine mammal? This modern partnership demonstrates that the ancient alliance between empires and animals has evolved with technology, but remains as crucial as ever. It proves that in the silent, shadowy domain beneath the sea, biological instinct can still outperform silicon and steel. Yet for all their sophisticated training, these modern animal agents are part of a much older tradition, one filled with legendary individual creatures whose spontaneous actions on the battlefield became the stuff of myth. The story of Bucephalus begins not with a king, but with a boy and a problem no man could solve. A massive black stallion was presented to his father, King Philip of Macedon, but the animal was so wild and terrified that it threw every experienced rider who approached. The king was ready to send the beast away, deeming it useless, But the young Alexander noticed something everyone else had missed. He saw that the horse was shying away from its own flickering shadow. With a calmness that defied his years, Alexander simply turned the horse to face the sun, so its shadow fell behind it. The animal instantly stilled. In that single, brilliant act of observation, Alexander did not break the horse's spirit. He won its trust. He named the stallion Bucephalus, and from that day forward, the two were inseparable. This was not merely a boy taming a horse. It was the moment a future conqueror's destiny clicked into place. The ancient historian Plutarch records that after his triumph, Alexander turned to his father and declared, "O my father, seek out another kingdom for yourself, for that which you have left me is too small." The confidence Bucephalus inspired was that monumental. For the next 2 decades, this legendary warhorse carried Alexander through every major battle, from the Granicus River to the final, grueling clash at the Hydaspes. He was more than transport. He was a partner in the very art of war, a living extension of Alexander's own will on the battlefield. Their bond was so profound that when Bucephalus finally died of old age after the Battle of the Hydaspes in 326 BC, Alexander was heartbroken. He did not just mourn his companion, he founded an entire city, Bucephalus, on the spot where his friend fell. It makes you wonder, what if Alexander had failed to tame the horse that day? Would his legendary confidence have been born? Would the map of the ancient world look entirely different without that one pivotal partnership? Such profound relationships were not limited to horses and emperors, as even the smallest creatures could earn a place of eternal honor. The death of a single bull could bring the most powerful empire on the Nile to a complete standstill. In the sweltering heat of ancient Memphis, the passing of the Apis bull was not a mere animal's death. It was the departure of a living god. This was not a metaphor. The Egyptians believed the god Ptah himself was incarnated in this specific, perfectly marked bull, a creature distinguished by a brilliant white diamond on its forehead and the black hide of the night sky. Its death plunged the entire kingdom into a state of profound, official mourning. The pharaoh, the intermediary between the people and the gods, now saw his own divine legitimacy suddenly thrown into question. The entire political and spiritual stability of Egypt hinged on this moment. Priests would immediately begin a desperate, nationwide search for the bull's successor, a calf that bore the exact sacred markings. The Greek historian Herodotus documented the immense scale of this operation, describing how the chosen bull was then brought to Memphis and installed in a lavish temple, living a life of unparalleled luxury, attended by its own priests and served only the finest foods. The bull's every action, from the way it ate to the path it walked, was interpreted as a divine oracle, guiding state policy and forecasting the kingdom's future. As the renowned Egyptologist Dr. Salima Ikram emphasizes, to harm the Apis bull was to declare war on the gods of Egypt itself, and by extension, the pharaoh. This was a matter of national security. A weak or sickly bull could be interpreted as a sign of the pharaoh's failing favor with the gods, potentially sparking rebellion or destabilizing a dynasty. It makes you wonder, could a delayed discovery of the new Apis have created a power vacuum, a spiritual crisis that rival claimants to the throne were quick to exploit? The bull was a political linchpin disguised as a religious icon. This profound, symbolic power was a force as real as any army, but other animals were employed for a far more direct and destructive purpose in the grim business of siege warfare. The logic of siege warfare was a brutal calculus of desperation. When stone walls and iron gates refused to yield, commanders turned to the animal kingdom for horrifyingly creative solutions. One of the most chilling tactics involved pigs. Attackers would soak the unfortunate creatures in flammable pitch or resin, set them alight and drive the screaming, living torches directly towards the enemy's wooden fortifications. Primary goal was to set the gates or siege towers on fire, but the psychological impact was just as devastating. The sight and sound of these intelligent animals writhing in agony created utter chaos and terror among the defenders on the walls. This use of pigs had a curious and strategic side effect as well. The Roman writer Aelian recorded a now legendary, though historically debated, account of war pigs being deployed specifically to counter war elephants. The theory was that the elephants, unaccustomed to the pigs' high-pitched, panicked squeals, would be thrown into a frenzy, trampling their own troops in a blind panic. This was siegecraft at its most ruthless, turning the battlefield into a theater of calculated cruelty. But pigs were far from the only creatures forced into this grim role. Snakes, particularly venomous species, became terrifying projectiles. Aelian also describes how armies would gather live snakes, seal them inside clay pots, and then hurl these biological grenades into enemy fortifications. When the jars shattered upon impact, the disoriented and angry snakes would strike at anyone nearby, sowing fear and causing casualties in tightly packed defensive positions. A medieval warfare expert, Dr. Kelly de Vries, explains that the logic of siege warfare was to use any available means to overcome fortifications, and that included turning the local fauna into improvised weapons. This principle reached its most sinister form during the Crusades, where besiegers were known to catapult not only beehives but also the carcasses of diseased animals over city walls. This act was an early, gruesome form of biological warfare designed to spread illness and decimate a population from within, breaking their will to resist through starvation and plague. What desperate, animal-based tactic turned the tide of a prolonged siege that textbooks have forgotten? The historical record is filled with such lost innovations, each a testament to the dark ingenuity of ancient conflict. These macabre strategies highlight the ruthless creativity employed when empires clashed. But beyond mammals and insects, the avian world offered empires far more than just messengers. A peregrine falcon's swift return to the gloved hand of a caliph was never just a hunt concluded. It was a performance of power, a silent message to any visiting ambassador witnessing the spectacle. In the royal courts of medieval Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, falconry was the ultimate sport of kings, a pursuit that demonstrated not just wealth but a masterful command over nature's most lethal aviators. The birds themselves were living status symbols. A rare white gyrfalcon from the Arctic North was a gift fit for an emperor, its value comparable to that of a castle or a title of nobility. Such a present could smooth over a diplomatic rift or secure a vital alliance, making the falcon a feathered ambassador in its own right. The Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II was so enthralled by the practice that he authored a massive and scientifically advanced tome, The Art of Hunting with Birds. This work was not a simple hobbyist's guide. It was a statement of imperial intellect and sophistication, a way to project an image of enlightened power across the continent. But beyond the pageantry lay a more shadowy utility. Falconers enjoyed the unique privilege of roaming across territories with their birds, often in border regions where ordinary travelers would be viewed with suspicion. Under the perfect cover of their sport, they could observe troop deployments, gauge the strength of fortifications, and listen for gossip in distant towns, all while ostensibly training their hawks. Their detailed knowledge of the landscape made them invaluable, if informal, intelligence agents. Is it possible that a treaty between England and France held firm because of a timely gift of particularly prized Saker falcons, or that a falconer's casual report of unguarded mountain pass prevented an invasion? This elegant sport wove animals directly into the delicate fabric of international diplomacy and espionage, proving that even the most regal of pastimes could have a razor-sharp edge. While falcons served the interests of kings and emperors, another bird was mobilized for the defense of entire communities. That frantic cackling from the Capitoline Hill was more than just noise. It was the sound of an empire being saved by its most unexpected soldiers. While the sacred geese of Juno are the stuff of legend, their role was rooted in a very practical reality. These birds are naturally territorial, loud, and possess incredibly sharp senses, making them perfect self-sustaining sentinels. The Roman historian Livy recorded that while the professional watchdogs remained silent, the geese detected the Gallic infiltrators and raised the alarm, giving the defending Romans just enough time to rally and repel the assault on their final stronghold. In an era without electronic sensors, a goose's honk was a sophisticated early warning system. A modern security analyst would note their decentralized nature, each bird acting as an independent motion detector, creating a network nearly impossible for an enemy to silence completely. How many other castles, temples, and frontier posts relied on a vigilant flock to be their first line of defense? The story powerfully demonstrates that the most effective security solutions are often the simplest and most biologically intuitive. Yet, while geese could protect the heart of an empire, other animals were essential for projecting its power outward, defining its very identity across vast new frontiers. Across that same horizon, a different kind of caravan moved not through scorching sand, but across vast, frozen seas. The success of the trans-Saharan empires finds a chilling parallel in the frozen north, where the expansion of the Inuit peoples across the Arctic was made possible not by the camel, but by another supremely adapted animal, the sled dog. For centuries, the Inuit relied on teams of powerful huskies to pull their sleds across the treacherous, shifting ice. This was not merely a mode of transport, it was a survival system. These dogs allowed for the hunting of seals and whales across immense territories, provided warmth in the brutal cold, and served as vigilant sentinels against polar bears. The dog sled was the Arctic equivalent of the camel caravan, a technology that turned an impassable, hostile environment into a habitable homeland and a domain for trade and cultural exchange. The Thule people, ancestors of the modern Inuit, used this canine-powered mobility to rapidly expand eastward from Alaska to Greenland, a migration that would have been unthinkable on foot. Their entire way of life, from the food they ate to the distant communities they connected with, was built upon the strength and endurance of their dogs. This logistical mastery over the ice mirrors the camel's conquest of the sand, proving that empires, whether of sun or snow, were often built on the backs of perfectly adapted animals. The partnership was so profound that the loss of a dog team in a storm could mean certain death for an entire family, just as a lost camel caravan could spell economic ruin for a Saharan kingdom. How many other hidden animal engines powered the rise of civilizations we have yet to fully appreciate? That same partnership of survival echoed in the frozen silence of the Arctic, where the panting of huskies and the rhythmic scrape of sled runners on ice were the only sounds marking a path through an otherwise impassable world. For the Inuit, and later for European explorers, the sled dog was not a luxury but an absolute necessity, the sole engine that made life and travel possible in a landscape that actively rejected human ambition. These powerful animals were the living foundation upon which survival, exploration, and even national claims of sovereignty in the polar regions were built. The legendary 1925 Serum Run to Nome stands as a timeless testament to their endurance. When a diphtheria outbreak threatened the isolated Alaskan town, a relay of 20 mushers and over 150 sled dogs raced 674 miles through a blizzard, with temperatures plummeting to 50 below zero. The lead dog Balto and his team famously completed the final 53-mile leg, delivering the life-saving antitoxin. This incredible feat, accomplished where machines had failed, did not just save a community. It captured the global imagination and directly influenced the subsequent development of reliable air sleds and snowmobiles for northern transport. In the race for the poles, the strategic choice of animal was equally decisive. The Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, the first person to reach the South Pole, studied his options with meticulous care. He watched as his rival, Robert Falcon Scott, struggled with motor sledges and ill-suited ponies that faltered in the deep snow. Amundsen instead placed his entire trust in Greenland huskies. He understood their unique physiology, their ability to conserve energy in extreme cold, and their instinct for navigating treacherous ice. This was not a sentimental choice, it was a tactical one that secured his victory. As a modern musher and historian explains, the bond between a musher and their lead dog is a partnership of survival. The dog's instinct and stamina open up territories that are otherwise closed to human ambition. This profound reliance makes you wonder what uncharted coastlines were first mapped, what remote scientific outposts were permanently established solely because of the raw power and unwavering resilience of a dog team. The sled dog was, without question, the indispensable engine of empire in the world's coldest frontiers. And just as the husky conquered the ice, a far more unexpected creature was quietly shaping the destiny of the world's most arid landscapes. The true measure of an empire's reach was not the speed of its cavalry, but the relentless, plodding pace of its supply trains. Behind the glittering legions of Rome, stretching for miles along muddy roads, trudged endless lines of donkeys. These animals, laden with grain, weapons, and tools, were the silent, beating heart of the imperial machine. While history remembers the chargers and the war elephants, it was the humble donkey, with its incredible strength, stubborn stamina, and ability to thrive on the poorest forage, that made sustained conquest possible. A Roman legion on the march was a logistical nightmare, requiring tons of supplies every single day. Its entire operational tempo was calculated not by the legion's marching speed, but by the pace of its donkey and mule trains. Without these animals, the army would have starved within a week of leaving its base. This reliance extended far beyond the military. As archaeologist Dr. Susan Alcock notes, you can trace the reach of an empire by the distribution of donkey bones and the remains of caravanserais built specifically for them. From the silver mines of Lorient that funded Athenian democracy to the vast spice routes crossing the Middle East, donkeys provided the fundamental connectivity that trade and administration demanded. Their durable hooves carved the paths that became the economic arteries of continents. How many famous military victories were actually secured not in the heroic charge, but days earlier, in the dusty, unheralded arrival of a donkey train carrying the food that kept the army in the field? This overlooked creature was a critical, if silent, partner in every imperial ambition. And just as the donkey formed the backbone of land-based empires, another patient creature carried the hopes of explorers across the trackless sea. Aboard the Santa Maria, the most vital navigational instrument was not the astrolabe, but the bleating of a small herd of goats. These animals, along with chickens and pigs, formed a living, breathing larder, the mobile agriculture that made the perilous crossing of the Atlantic possible. On voyages where weeks could pass without sight of land, these creatures provided the steady supply of fresh milk, eggs, and eventually, meat that kept scurvy and starvation at bay. They were a renewable food source in the most literal sense, often bred right there on the rolling decks or left to multiply on newly discovered shores. This practice of seeding islands with livestock became a deliberate strategy for empire. The meticulous journals of Captain James Cook are filled with records of goats and pigs released on Pacific islands, not merely as an ecological afterthought, but as a calculated act to provision future shipwrecked sailors and secure supply lines for the vessels that would follow. A naval historian observes that the ability to carry live animals was as important a technological advance as the compass or the astrolabe for European expansion. Without these walking, breathing provisions, entire fleets would have been forced to turn back, and fledgling colonies would have withered before they could take root. But this biological insurance policy came with a devastating, unintended price. On countless islands, from the Caribbean to the Galapagos, these introduced species ran wild, consuming native plants and outcompeting local fauna, triggering ecological collapses that reshaped landscapes forever. The very animals that ensured the survival of explorers often spelled doom for the isolated worlds they discovered. This profound reliance on livestock reveals a simple, brutal truth. What voyages of discovery would have failed, what colonies would have starved without the milk and meat provided by these shipboard animals? They were the unsung, four-legged fuel for the engine of global empire. Yet, while goats and pigs provided physical sustenance for expansion, another animal was carefully groomed to feed the ideological machine of the state itself. That gleaming silver eagle was far more than a flag. For the Roman legionary marching into the misty forests of Germania, the Aquila standard carried before him was the literal embodiment of his legion's soul and the favor of Jupiter, the king of the gods. To lose this sacred standard in battle was not merely a tactical defeat, it was a spiritual catastrophe, a sign that the gods had utterly abandoned the unit. The historian Tacitus meticulously recorded how the behavior of actual eagles in the sky was scrutinized for divine messages. The direction of its flight or the powerful beating of its wings could be interpreted as a crucial omen, causing a seasoned general to delay an advance or press an attack with renewed confidence. This belief in the eagle's divine connection made the disaster in the Teutoburg forest in 9 AD so profoundly shocking. The annihilation of 3 entire legions was bad enough, but the capture of their 3 eagle standards by the Germanic tribes was an unthinkable disgrace that echoed through the empire for generations. The subsequent recovery of these lost eagles became an obsession for emperors like Germanicus, a mission to restore not just military honor but the perceived favor of the gods themselves. As the renowned classicist Professor Mary Beard affirms, the eagle standard was the soul of the legion. To lose it was to lose the unit's identity and the favor of the gods. This deep-seated belief makes you wonder how many battles were won or lost not by the strength of swords, but by the perceived omen of an eagle's flight. A hesitant commander misreading a bird's natural behavior as a bad sign might have held back his reserves at the critical moment, gifting victory to the enemy. The psychological power of this animal symbol was a tangible force on the battlefield, as real as any weapon. Yet while the eagle served as a sacred, unifying symbol for the entire empire, other birds were deployed for a far more cunning and deceptive purpose. A seemingly innocent flock of ducks on the Rhine could mask an approaching invasion. Roman sentries, conditioned to ignore the natural waterfowl on the river, would often dismiss the distant shapes as part of the scenery, a fatal perceptual blind spot that Germanic scouts learned to exploit. They would use carefully crafted decoy ducks, hollowed from wood or formed from skins, to conceal themselves as they drifted silently across the water, gathering intelligence on Roman fortifications and troop movements right under the noses of the legionaries. This tactical deception, playing on the enemy's expectation of normalcy, was a stroke of psychological genius. The principle proved so effective that it transcended the ancient world. Centuries later, during the Pacific theater of World War II, Japanese forces employed an almost identical ruse, using wooden decoy ducks to camouflage the placement of underwater mines and harbor defenses from Allied reconnaissance planes. A specialist in military intelligence history observes that the most effective deception plays on what the enemy expects to see. A duck on the water is invisible, a man is not. This practice reveals a profound understanding of both animal behavior and human psychology in warfare. How many other river crossings or amphibious assaults succeeded because a defender's gaze slid harmlessly over a decoy, believing it to be nothing more than a harmless animal? The animal kingdom provided empires not just with brute force, but with the very blueprint for cunning and stealth. This clever manipulation of perception, however, would soon be overshadowed by a much louder, more disruptive animal contribution to warfare, one that heralded a decisive technological shift. The true foundation of every empire was not laid in stone, but in the rich, dark soil turned by the ox. In the fertile fields of Mesopotamia, a farmer guided a team of these powerful animals, their immense shoulders straining against a wooden yoke as they pulled a primitive plow through the earth. This simple, repetitive act was arguably the most revolutionary in human history. The domestication of the ox and its application to traction for both plowing and pulling carts shattered the previous limits of agriculture. For the first time, farmers could cultivate larger areas of land with far less human labor. This single innovation created a consistent agricultural surplus, a bounty of grain that could feed people who were not farmers themselves. It was this very surplus that allowed for the emergence of specialized classes, the soldiers who formed armies, the priests who organized religion, and the administrators who built the first cities of Sumer. The economic value of these animals was so immense that it was codified into law. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest legal codes, includes specific, detailed statutes regarding the renting of oxen and the liabilities for their injury or death, treating them not as mere livestock but as vital capital equipment. As the economic historian Professor Ian Morris argues, the power of the ox was the first great energy revolution, preceding steam and electricity, and it made complex society possible. Just consider for a moment what ancient cities never would have risen, what legendary armies never would have been raised without the steady, powerful pull of the ox at the plow. This fundamental, unglamorous partnership between human and beast literally laid the groundwork for all subsequent imperial ambitions, proving that the most profound power often moves at the slowest, most patient pace. This essential, ancient partnership finds a direct parallel in an animal whose service spans from the ancient world to the modern era, the honeybee. That same stubborn intelligence saved an artillery column from plunging into a Himalayan ravine. Where a horse might be driven blindly forward by its handler, a mule would simply plant its feet and refuse to move, instinctively sensing the unstable ground that a human could not see. This was not mere obstinance, it was a survival trait honed over centuries, and it made the mule the undisputed master of military logistics in the world's most unforgiving landscapes. A product of deliberate breeding between a male donkey and a female horse, the mule is a perfect hybrid, inheriting the donkey's legendary endurance, tough hooves, and cautious temperament, combined with the larger size and greater strength of its horse mother. This hybrid vigor produced an animal that could thrive on poor forage, carry immense loads, and maintain a steady, plodding pace up mountain paths that would break the spirit of any horse. The Roman legions understood this value completely, their vast baggage trains crawling across Europe powered by thousands of these reliable creatures. Centuries later, during the Peninsular War, the Duke of Wellington's campaigns against Napoleon depended entirely on mule trains to supply his armies across the rugged terrain of Spain and Portugal. And in the global conflicts of the 20th century, when mechanized vehicles bogged down in the mud of Flanders or stalled on the narrow trails of the Italian Apennines, it was the mule that answered the call. A United States Army manual from World War II stated plainly, "The mule is the most dependable animal for mountain artillery. It will keep going long after a horse has given up." Their legendary stubbornness was, in reality, a profound form of self-preservation. A mule would not exhaust itself to death for a master's ambition. It possessed an innate understanding of its own limits, a trait that often saved both the animal and its precious cargo from catastrophe. So we must ask, how many artillery pieces actually reached their shell-blasted positions on the peaks of Monte Cassino because a team of mules endured what machines could not? How many remote outposts in the Hindu Kush held firm because a mule train navigated a pass no truck would ever traverse? This hybrid workhorse stands as a testament to the pragmatic, often overlooked application of animal husbandry in the relentless engine of empire. The legacy of these creatures proves that the most decisive force on any battlefield was not always the most dramatic, but often the most dependable. The arrival of Spanish ships in the Caribbean was an invasion of flesh and bone as much as steel. Christopher Columbus' second voyage carried a living cargo that would prove far more transformative than any weapon, a deliberate menagerie of horses, cattle, pigs, and sheep. This was the Columbian Exchange in motion, a global biological reorganization where animals acted as the vanguard of empire. In the Great Plains, the descendants of escaped Spanish horses found a new home, and their acquisition by tribes like the Comanche sparked a revolution. Almost overnight, pedestrian hunters became formidable equestrian societies, their power and reach expanding dramatically as they mastered the horse for bison hunting and warfare, creating powerful new nations that would challenge European expansion for centuries. Meanwhile, other introduced species ran wild. Feral pigs and cattle, what the Spanish called mestiños or mustangs, proliferated at an astonishing rate, consuming native plants, trampling crops, and fundamentally reshaping entire ecosystems to resemble the pastures of Europe. These biological shock troops created a ready-made economic foundation for incoming colonists, providing meat, leather, and tallow. As one environmental historian observes, the arrival of European livestock was a form of biological imperialism that often preceded and enabled the military and political conquest. This flow of fauna was overwhelmingly one way. The turkey was a notable New World gift to Europe, but it was an exception. The Americas largely lacked the suite of large domesticated animals that had powered Eurasian civilizations for millennia. Scholars like Jared Diamond have pointed to this absence as a decisive factor in the ease of European conquest. Without immunity to Old World diseases that often traveled with livestock, and without their own cavalry or draft animals, many indigenous societies faced an insurmountable disadvantage. How did the very composition of New World fauna, altered by European animals, pave the way for colonial empires? It created a familiar landscape for the colonist and an alien, disrupted one for the native, a silent, grazing army that forever changed the balance of power. This grand exchange demonstrates with stunning clarity that animals were not just tools of empire, but active, breathing agents in the most profound demographic and ecological shift in modern history. After tracing these diverse threads, from war elephants to invisible biological invaders, a single, unifying question demands an answer. History's grand narrative, so often focused on kings and treaties, is written in the paw prints and hoofbeats of its animal partners. The thundering charge of the war elephant, the silent flight of a messenger pigeon, the divine status of the Apis bull, and the patient plod of the donkey all share a common thread. They were not passive bystanders but active participants, their instincts and abilities woven into the very fabric of imperial power. Their influence was not a single note but a complex symphony, echoing across battlefields as weapons, along trade routes as logistical engines, and within temples as living symbols of political authority. Even their unintended roles as carriers of plague or as ecological disruptors reshaped continents and toppled thrones. These stories force a profound shift in perspective. They challenge us to see history not as an exclusively human drama, but as a deep and enduring partnership, a story of how we have domesticated, worshipped, weaponized, and fundamentally relied upon the creatures around us. The legacy of these animal agents is a humbling reminder that the fates of nations and the trajectories of entire civilizations often balanced on a wing, a hoof, or a tusk, on factors far beyond human foresight or control. So the next time you watch a pigeon navigate a city square or see a horse grazing in a field, pause for a moment. Look beyond the familiar sight and remember the hidden histories they carry, the empires they helped to build, and the ones they inadvertently brought down. We would love to know which of these animal stories surprised you the most, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through the animal archives of history, please subscribe for more explorations into the forgotten forces that shaped our world.